Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would finally give my little list of the top 10 pound for pound boxers, at least my list heading into that of the year 2024. And this list was especially hard for me to rank, and I'm pretty sure that I say this almost every single year, but each and every single year it seems to get harder and harder for me to rank because my skill system, or overall my system for ranking a top 10 pound for pound fighter, or a top 15 or top 20 or top 30 pound for pound fighter, it is completely based off of a point system. But this year I only really did that of who I consider to be the top 10 pound for pound. I didn't really do much of the top 15 or top 20 pound for pound, but the fighters that are for me on this list, they are my current top 10 pound for pound. That doesn't mean that other fighters maybe could have not made the list, but that's why I also have an honorable mentions list. But this list is just going to be very particularly interesting. But, for those of you that have never seen my top 10 pound for pound list, it is based off of a scoring system. It seems to change a little bit every year because I'm always trying to find that of a more consistent and that more of a logical and objective type of point system. But I'm still kind of figuring it out myself. So, of course, if you think that some of these spots that this fighter could have been there or that this fighter could have been here, a little bit lower, a little bit higher, I certainly understand it. There might even be certain fighters on this list that you completely disagree with. But there's a reason why I have certain fighters on this list where they are, or at least on the list in the first place. A lot of these fighters, to be honest with you, on this list, they certainly could be interchanged. They could be top five, top three, top two, bottom two. The at the last spot. It really depends on what you like and what you're taking a look at. But basically, how my point system works is that right now I'm ranking it off of five categories: resume, recent success, accomplishments, dominance, and skill set. And you have a possibility of getting 12 total points in every single one of those categories. And if you get 12 points in every single one of those categories, then you get an A plus. And basically what that means is that if you get a 12 in every single one of those categories, that you certainly overall are debatably the number one pound for pound fighter in the world, and that you almost would have no fault, and certainly a great argument to being the claim as the best, or the all around number one pound for pound fighter in the world. But anyways, there's going to be certain times on this list where people probably take a look at it and they're going to be like, why did you have this guy as a lower or higher score for this reason? When it seems like, your standards are this. And I'm going to explain, because depending on the resume or who you've beaten, or, what accomplishments you have, it may depend on how I rank that certain category for you. But anyways, these are going to be my top 10 pound for pound boxers now in the year of 2024 until something else changes. And of course, we're going to get straight into it. But anyways, first of all, these are going to be my honorable mentions, and I'm going to talk about some of them as well. So for my honorable mentions, with the top 15, the top 30 pound per pound, a certain amount of you actually may not be able to see this. The font is a little bit too small probably. But you see Gervonta Tank Davis there for me, Josh Taylor, Jamel Charlo, Tim Zhu, Vasily Lomachenko, David Benavidez, Juan Francisco Estrada, Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, Steven Coolboy Fulton, AJ Anthony Joshua, Jerron Boots Ennis, Yana Beck, Errol Spence Jr., and that of Emmanuel Navarrete. And I could have possibly named a couple of other fighters that maybe deserve to be on this list. Maybe a Caleb Plant, or maybe some of you guys would have Charlo, or something like that up here. Maybe even some of you would have Andrade. I'm not sure if I would have some of those guys on there, but it's really up to you. Anyways, those are guys that I would have anywhere from 11 to 30. Some of these fighters I put on here not because they would necessarily all be within my top 20 pound per pound or something like that of a sort, but I also brought up some of these fighters because some people might mention these fighters and they may wonder where I necessarily put them. I don't really know, at least with certainty, because to be honest with you, I haven't really given them a ranking. I only worried about my top 10 pound per pound list, to top 15. So those are my honorable mentions. But the two questions I'm sure that I'm probably going to get the most is why, did you not put Gervonta Tank Davis or Errol Spence Jr. on your top 10 pound per pound list? Especially because I had Errol Spence Jr. within my top 5 pound per pound last year. Well, the reason why I don't have Errol Spence Jr. on my top 5 pound per pound list anymore is because I usually have a little bit of a rule that in order for you to be on my top 10 pound per pound list, you have to have that of belts, at least at the current moment in time. And if you don't have belts, you have to be decently dominant, or you have to be someone possibly like that of a Canelo Alvarez or maybe a Terence Crawford, where you you might be heading into another weight division, or you're just so severely dominant and you haven't lost as of recent. When it comes on, and of course Canelo has a recent loss, but he was able to get back in the ring with 2 wins, all sort of stuff, and of course against Jamel Charlo, which was a decently big win. But anyways, when it comes down to Beterbiev Spence Jr., the way that he got beat by that of Terence Crawford, not only did he pretty much get completely dominated in the fight that was supposed to be looked at as the quote-unquote fight of the decade, but on top of that, he had only had work within that of one weight division, so I couldn't really give him a great amount of extra credit for that of accomplishments, even though, of course, you could debate that it was A grade. The problem is that he only had work within that of one weight division. I do believe that he's beaten a certain amount of A grade level fighters, but I'm not really 100% sure if you would debate that he ever defeated a definitive top 10 pound for pound fighter. And that's why, in my view, he kind of fell from my top 10 pound for pound list. But if you put him still within your top 10 pound for pound, I don't blame you. It's just that at the moment, he's off of mine, personally. And then, of course, you have Gervonta Tank Davis. A lot of people will wonder, why don't you have him on your top 10 pound for pound list? And I've already stated this a multitude of times. I think that he's a great talent, and I think that he's a great all-around fighter. But I don't really know how great he actually is until he steps in the ring with somebody. His resume, in my view, is debatably not A grade, and on top of that, his accomplishments are debatably not A grade, because he's really only been a champion, in my view, in one weight class. Because a lot of these other belts are interim or, overall, regular belts and all sorts of stuff. I mean, I just really don't count that. Now, apparently, from what I hear, he might be the super WBA champion of that division. And if that means that he got reinstated to that of the official WBA title, then, of course, I'll count him as a two-weight division champion. And sometimes, even if a fighter ends up winning the IBO or a super belt, I will count it depending on who they beat, when it comes down to it. But, I just don't think that Gervonta Tank Davis, I don't think that he's really gotten to that point yet to where he's beaten, a whole lot of definitive A-grade fighters, if really any definitive A-grade fighters at all. So that's the reason why I wanted to put that there. But both Spence and Gervonta Tank Davis clearly could be on my top 10 pound, clearly could be at least within my top 15. So I wanted to claim that first of all. But anyways, those are pretty much the honorable mentions. There may have been a couple of other fighters that I could have put on here. I just probably forgot about them, or it slipped my mind. But anyways, let's now go to the number 10 spot and let's get this list started. So at number 10, of course, who you see is that of Mr. Shakur Stevenson. And for his resume, I have that of an A- because I don't necessarily think that he has that of the greatest of resumes. And some may even say that putting it as an A- is a little bit too generous. And I know that certain people are going to say, what are you talking about? He beat Robson Conceição, and he also beat Oscar Valdez and, Edwin De Los Santos. I don't really consider any of those guys definitive A-grade fighters. Maybe Oscar Valdez when Shakur Stevenson had fought him. But the problem is that I'm just not really sure if you can claim that there's a lot of fighters on his resume that I would definitively say are just 100% A-grade. And I'm not blaming that all on him. I think that he's gotten a great amount of accomplishments. And one thing that I will definitively give to that of Shakur Stevenson is that he is a legitimate, three-time weight division champion. He's not someone like Gervonta Tank Davis where, his three-weight division titles have, mainly been interim or regular titles and all sorts of stuff. I really don't count those type of belts. So I will give Shakur Stevenson that. His recent success, of course, has been that of an 11. The reason why I put it down a little bit lower is because, once again, I think the resume is lacking a little bit. And on top of that, when it comes down to it, that fight against Edwin De Los Santos, someone that I kind of thought was a B-grade level fighter at his best at times, I thought that he struggled. And to be honest with you, I thought that his skill set compared to his usual form looked very limited in that fight. And I need to see him, overall in bigger fights. And there's going to be other fighters on here where, they kind of have a higher score, even though they performed either just as badly or even worse, possibly even against a lesser tier fighter. But the reason why I either have their skill set or dominance higher than that of Shakur's at the current moment in time is because they've already proven themselves debatably against top 10 or at the very least top 20 pound for pound fighters. Anyways, but yeah, that's the reason why I put that there. Accomplishments, I also put as an A-, but you could very clearly also put this, as an A. Some may even say A-. The reason, or excuse me, A+. The The reason why I put it overall at an A- is because he is a 3-weight division champion, but I don't think that he's ever been completely unified in a weight division. And on top of that, like I said, I think that it does have to go down a little bit when you talk about his resume. That's the reason overall, kind of why I wanted to talk about that. His skill set, in my view, at the very least, is an 11 out of 12. The reason why it just went down a little bit for me is because, once again, in that last fight, he looked very, very limited. I don't think that he looked good at all in that fight. He really didn't have much outside that of a lead hand and maybe a right hook. But once again, you could have easily scored this 12 out of 12 as well. It's just that Shakur, in my view, he's still a little bit wet behind the ears. He's still a little bit inexperienced for me to 100% say that his skill set is 12 out of 12. I also need to see him get in the ring with a fighter that I think is truly going to challenge him. So, once again, I just thought that I would put that there. And the dominance, 11 out of 12 as well. You also could have easily put that 12 out of 12. Because other than that of the Edwin De Los Santos fight, he's been relatively dominant. So I will give that to him. But anyways, so that pretty much is about it for Shakur Stevenson. He gets 53 out of 60 points. You could have debated him higher on the list. You could have debated him maybe at 9, 8, 7, 6, so somewhere around there. But I probably, at the moment at least, would have not put him within my top 5 pound for pound. But you could have debated him higher on this list. But I think that number 10, at least for me, is the perfect spot for him. Now let's go on to number 9. Now number 9 on this list, as you can see, is Mr. Teofimo Lopez. And some may say, why do you have Teofimo Lopez above that of Shakur Stevenson? This makes no sense because he lost to that of George Kambosos not too long ago. And George Kambosos is really not a guy that Teofimo Lopez probably should have lost to. And I would highly agree with that, but I think that Teofimo Lopez, I think that he's really much redeemed himself ever since then, especially with that great win over Josh Taylor. And the resume, I would just have to definitively say, is better. The thing is about Shakur Stevenson, and resume is the most important category to me. The thing is about Shakur Stevenson is that I don't think that he really has quite the resume that Teofimo Lopez has. Yes, Teofimo has that one loss, but one thing that Teofimo Lopez has that a lot of fighters on this list don't have is that he has 2 wins over former top 10 pound-for-pound fighters, and he beat them when they were both looked to be at the peak of their career or when he was not favored in either fight. So I have to give Teofimo Lopez a lot of credit for that. He beat Lomachenko when he was looked at as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter, no matter what you think about the result. And then, of course, he was able to beat Josh Taylor, and he was able to have a very dominant performance against him in the second half of that fight. So the recent success I had to have is an 11 because, of course, he was a little bit shaky against that of Sandor Martin, who's a tricky boxer. And, of course, he did lose to that of George Kambosos. But the thing that I do have to give Teofimo Lopez credit for is that, once again, he had that great win over Lomachenko and performed even better against that of Josh Taylor, who was the former complete undisputed champion at that of 140 pounds. That also means that accomplishments-wise, I have him at an 11. Because he won 3 out of the 4 main belts at 135 when it was a very talented weight division. He also defeated Richard Comey and some other decent guys there. And then, of course, he goes to 140. He defeats Sandor Martin, who never was a champion, but he was a guy that actually beat Mikey Garcia. So I give him a little bit of credit for that. B+, maybe even some would debate A- fighter for the weight class if he wanted to. Probably more B to B+, but still a very tricky fighter. And then, of course, he beats Josh Taylor. So I had to give him a certain amount of credit for that, for now finally becoming a 2-weight division champion. Skill set, I also put N at 11. I think he does have certain faults within his skill set, but of course he was very dominant against that, of Josh Taylor in the second half of the fight. Dominance I put at a 10 because, once again, a little bit shaky against Sandor Martin, and on top of that, he did lose to George Kambosos not too long ago. But once again, you could have even debated that a little bit higher because, of course, he was very dominant against Josh Taylor in the second half of that fight, and also he was able to beat Vasily Lomachenko. So Teofimo Lopez, could have even debated him a little bit higher on this list. Some also would debate Shakur Stevenson over him, but Teofimo Lopez at the personal moment is on my top 10 pound-for-pound list, and he's at number 9 for me. Anyways. So at number 8 on my pound-for-pound list, I have that in Mr. Dmitry Bivol, who, of course, I believe is the current WBA champion of that of the light heavyweight division. And, of course, Teofimo Lopez, I believe, got that of 54 points out of 60, by the way, for those of you that did not see it. But anyways, the resume for Dmitry Bivol I had to put as an A. I'm not 100% sure if I could put it as an A plus. And some people may say, well, Mr. Boxing, realist, what are you talking about? Dmitry Bivol, he beat the guy that you said was the former undisputed number one pound for pound fighter, and that's true, he did. But on top of that, I don't know if his resume is quite as expansive for the weight division as what Artur Beterbiev would be. And although he did beat Canelo, and he was not favored to win that fight, Canelo, I do think, clearly is smaller in stature, and I think that he's a guy that, once again, is probably a blown-up middleweight. I don't think that Canelo is really a natural super middleweight. I don't think that he's a natural light heavyweight. And, it just is what it is. So I think Dmitry Bivol got a great, great win, and that's a big part of the reason why his resume is A. But also when you take a look at some of the other bigger wins in his career, he has that of Joe Smith, and he has that of Sullivan Barrera, and he has some other decent wins as well, Jean Pascal, but I don't think that his resume is quite as expansive as what it could be for that other light heavyweight division, because I think Beterbiev's, in my personal view, I think that it's a little bit more expansive for the division, so that's why I didn't quite put it as an A+. But recent success, of course, I had to put as an A+, because, the man has basically been super, super dominant, and he's been great. And dominance also could have been a 12 as well. Just to talk about that, I think the reason why I put it at an 11 is because, once again, I just don't think that his resume is quite as expansive for the division as that of Artur Beterbiev. And the reason why that being, once again, is because I think Beterbiev has competed against more better and more dangerous, contenders in that of the light heavyweight division on average. So that's the reason why I think the dominance, combined also with the fact that he's had a little bit of problems at times kind of getting the stoppage. And, once again, I think that the greatest opponent that he ever defeated, obviously Canelo Alvarez, but I think that there also was a clear size advantage there. So once again, you could have obviously had, a 12 out of 12 for dominance. The skill set I put as a 12. Accomplishments I put as an A- because he's only ever won one belt in his career. In recent success, once again, I had it at 12. So Dmitry Bivol, 56 out of 60 for me. Easily could have put it at 57. This is certainly a fighter that you could debate as top 10, or excuse me, top 5 pound for pound if you wanted to. But I think around 8, 7, maybe 6 is probably perfect for Dmitry Bivol. Once again, I think he needs to get in the ring with some of the other great top contenders of that weight division. And of course, there's a possibility, from what I hear, of Bivol versus Beterbiev happening next. But that's why Bivol, he's at my number 8 spot. Easily could have debated him higher on this list, but that's the reason why I had it this way. Anyways, let's go on to number 7. So number 7 also is the other Russian, also the other light heavyweight champion of the world, Mr. Artur Beterbiev. Now his resume I have as an A, I have as an 11, the same as Dmitry Bivol's. But I think that his resume for the weight class, I do think that it is better than that of Dmitry Bivol's. And if you were going to debate maybe that his resume is better than Bivol's just because he's competed against more talented guys, probably more his size, I think that maybe you could debate that. Now, of course, Bivol has that fantastic win over that of Canelo Alvarez, but once again, I just think that there also was a clear size advantage there. So that's why, not really 100% sure if I can claim that both of these guys have an A+ resume, but at the very least for their weight classes, they clearly have an A grade resume at the very least. Recent success, of course, I have to have it as an A+. You could have a serious debate that Artur Beterbiev is the most dominant fighter on the planet, at least when you just talk about him stopping his opponents. The man has a 100% knockout rate. Accomplishments, I also put as an A-, but you could have also clearly put this as an A, because he is almost completely unified within that weight class. He does have 3 of the main belts within that weight class. A- to A, I think, is good around that ranking. I don't think that I can quite put it as A+. I think to get it within the A+ category, I think that I would have to see you either completely unify a division, or be, debatably a 3-weight division champion and win the majority of the belts, at least within 2 of your weight classes. That's kind of how I would rank it personally. So that's why, in terms of accomplishments, I put it as an A-. Skill set, I at least put an 11. There's certain things that I think you can say that maybe certain fighters might be able to take advantage of in terms of Beterbiev. Sometimes he can be a bit stiff, but, he actually does have a very good skill set. I think that he has an A-level skill set at the very least. You could seriously debate that he has an A+ level skill set if you wanted to. All this is very debatable. And dominance, of course, I don't think that I have a choice. The man is A+ clearly in that category. I think that, every single one of these categories right here, especially with Beterbiev. I think that really all these are debatable. To be honest, some may even debate that he's a 12 in every single category. Some people may debate that. I don't know if I would quite debate that, but you certainly could debate that he deserves to be higher on this list. He's one of the harder fighters for me to rank because, once again, I don't really know, in terms of the accomplishments. I think that they're great. But in order for me to get you to an A or A plus, I think there just needs to be a little bit more. At least certainly a two-weight division champion over some great fighters. But Artur Beterbiev is right there with a lot of fighters today. So if you were to debate him higher, I certainly don't have a problem with it. But him and Bivol pretty much tied in my view. You could easily interchange one or two of those fighters. Is really up to you. They're pretty much along the same positioning, but he also gets 56 out of 50 from me. So at number 6 on my list, we have Devin the Dream Haney. And Devin the Dream Haney also was a little bit difficult to rank. You could easily put him at higher on this list. You could easily put him at the number 5 spot. I don't think that Haney would have been any higher than number 5 for me. But if you were going to debate that Devin Haney was within your top 5 pound for pound, I don't really have a problem with it. I think that he's definitely a fighter that for sure I have to have on my top 10 pound for pound list. The resume is A minus, and some people may say, wow, how could you have that as A minus? It should be an A at the very least. And that's definitely a great argument. I don't have a problem with that. It just depends on what you're looking at. George Kambosos, for example, I never really thought that he was a definitive A-grade fighter in the first place. I thought that he just kind of was a bad matchup for Teofimo Lopez. But once again, you could clearly argue that this is A grade at the very least, because if you had Kambosos within your top 10 pound for pound, and then of course he was able to get the victory over Vasily Lomachenko, who probably would have not been within my top 10 pound for pound at the time, and on a certain amount of other people's lists, but for some, maybe at the time. But of course he was also able to defeat Regis Prograis. I think the reason why I ranked this A minus once again is because I don't think that he's ever beaten a definitive top 10 pound for pound fighter. And for you to be within my top 5 pound for pound list, at least at times, when there's similar accomplishments or people that are 3 or 4 weight division champions, I think for you to be over them, in my personal view, you would have to defeat at least one definitive A grade level fighter that would have been on pretty much everybody's top 10 pound for pound list. Lomachenko would have not been on my top 10 pound per pound list last year, just in my personal opinion, because he had no belts, and on top of that, he had not won a big enough fight in my view ever since he had lost to that of Teofimo Lopez. But once again, you clearly could have put that, at a very least an 11. I would have not had a problem with that. Regis Prograis, in my view, was an A-minus level fighter. Lomachenko was still a very good fighter, top 15 pound per pound at the very least. And then George Kambosos, he probably didn't make my top 10 pound per pound after he defeated Teofimo Lopez, but he would have been top 15 as well. So Devin Haney, that's the only thing that is keeping me, him at an A- for his resume. But if you easily wanted to put this at an A grade, some may even say A plus, I would get it. As for recent success, I have to put it as an A plus at a 12. Somewhere around there. He's been very successful. The only fight where he hasn't really been majorly dominant in, as of recent, has been that of the Vasily Lomachenko fight. Accomplishments, I have to put it at around an A plus, or at the very least an A. He's completely undisputed in one weight division at 135, and then he had the most dominant performance over Regis Prograis, to where basically Prograis didn't win a single round, became a very easy 2-time, champion. And then skill set and 11 and dominance 11. I would say that, in the Lomachenko fight, that he wasn't super dominant. A certain amount of people may even have debated that he lost that fight. And I would say that his skill set, I'm not 100% sure if I would say that it's a 12 out of 12. I think that at times that in terms of his defense that he could be a little bit better. And at times I think he's a bit too hittable. But Devin Haney is proving me every single fight that he's getting a little bit better and better as time goes along. So that's why I also have him as a 56 out of 60 points. You easily could have debated him a little bit higher on this list. Some may even debate a little bit lower. It's up to you. But I think that Haney deserves the right spot at number 6. Or, could have also been 5. At 5 or 6. Really. These next two fighters, in my view, are very interchangeable. So once again, Devin Haney gets 56 out of 60 points for me. He's at my number 6 spot. Let's go on to the next spot at number 5. So number 5 on my list is that of Tyson Fury. And of course, a lot of people are going to find this pick controversial, depending on that of, the category. But a lot of people, of course, would say, why do you have Tyson Fury above that of Beterbiev? Why do you have him above Devin Haney? Why do you have him really even on your top 10 pound for pound list? A lot of people have not liked the fact that I put Tyson Fury on my top 10 pound for pound list because he's a heavyweight fighter. And there's going to be even more people that dislike that he's on my top 10 pound for pound list because, of course, he really almost did lose to that of Francis Ngannou, who, of course, was an MMA fighter and probably trained a bit in boxing, but certainly was not a professionally ranked boxer before he got in the ring. And Fury not only got, knocked down by Ngannou in that fight, but he damn near got beat. He ended up winning, but he only won by a point on my scorecard. Well, the reason why I have him at number 5, and trust me, he did drop overall a couple spots from my list last year, but the reason why I still have him within my top 5 is because of the resume. When I take a look at Fury, he does have something that Devin Haney does not definitively have in my view, and he has something that a lot of these other fighters don't have, and that is a win over a definitive, at one point in time, top 10, really top 5 or top 3 pound for pound fighter. And he did it with quite dominance against that of Vladimir Klitschko, or at least he did it in clear fashion. Where Vladimir Klitschko, yes, he was 39 years old and he was getting a bit older, but at the end of the day, Vladimir Klitschko was favored to beat that of Tyson Fury and knock him out, and Tyson Fury was able to completely dominate him. And some people might say, well, that was several years ago, that was 10 years ago, why are we still counting that? Well, it would depend on whether you're undefeated or not. It would depend on whether you're undefeated or not. Just like Andre Ward, when he retired for a little bit and then he returned to boxing, they returned him as the number 1 pound for pound fighter because of his past accomplishments, because basically it never ended because he was undefeated. Now, if you're something like that of a Canelo or a Manny Pacquiao or something like that, then it can kind of come into play. But Tyson Fury is an undefeated fighter, so what that means is that his momentum is still going when it comes down to it. So I still have to count those fights from several years ago. So his resume right now, I put at an 11 because Fury, in my view, defeated a definitive, at one point in time, top 5 pound for pound fighter, and he did it, with relative ease. He also did that with a definitive top 20 pound for pound fighter, in my view, against that of Deontay Wilder. He also did that with relative ease. Accomplishments, at least for the weight class, because he's only going to be a heavyweight. You could have debated that a little bit lower. You could have debated that at either 11 or 12. But Fury, at one point in time, he has won every single belt within that weight division. He's not been completely undisputed yet, but he won, all 3 of the belts from Klitschko, and then against Wilder, he was able to win that of the WBC belt. And let's also keep in mind that against both Wilder and Klitschko, Klitschko once again would have been top 5 pound for pound when Fury beat him, and Wilder top 20 pound for pound. And on some lists, top 10 pound for pound, he was able to do it with very good dominance, or at least a decent amount of dominance, And that's why I also have his skill set at a 12. And some people may say, how could you possibly have Tyson Fury's skill set at a 12 when he damn near lost to Francis Ngannou this year? And once again, I understand that, but Fury also is a guy that tends to fight to the level and the caliber of his competition. Now, if you wanted to put it at a little bit lower, you could, but I do believe that Fury has a complete skill set. I just think that he's a guy, once again, that fights to the caliber of his competition. And for me to allege that Fury has anything else than an 11 in terms of the skill set, I think that you would have to allege that Vladimir Klitschko, that either A, he just was not that good, or B, that he was completely washed up. And I don't think that I can really allege either of those. Also in terms of Wilder, we all know that he's more of a one-dimensional fighter and that he doesn't really have an elite skill set, but he was very dangerous at the time. He still was one of the top 20 pound for pound fighters, and Fury was not favored to win some of those fights. So that's why Fury, once again, some of the rankings here might confuse people. In terms of the resume, I think that that's probably the perfect rating. Recent success, that's not really supposed to be an A+, but supposed to be an A-, at 10. I think that that's very, very fair. I did have to rank him a little bit lower there because of his damn near loss to Francis Ngannou. But accomplishments for the weight class, I would say, is either at an 11 or 12. And skill set, I also would say, is at either an 11 or 12. Because Fury, at his best, has shown me that at least for a heavyweight fighter, he has a complete game. He can fight on the front foot, he can fight on the back foot, he can fight on the inside, he can fight on the outside. Tyson Fury can pretty much do whatever he wants to, but I do think that he took Francis Ngannou a little bit too lightly, and we're going to see how good Fury really is once again, at least at this point in time in his career, against Oleksandr Usyk this February. But I have Fury at number 5. Once again, I'd have Fury either at number 5 or number 6. You could have easily ranked him lower on the list as well. At the moment, because of that recent Francis Ngannou performance, I can't really have him any higher than number 5 or number 6, But yeah, Fury has been on my top 10 pound for pound list for a few years now, especially ever since that Deontay Wilder win. And the fact that he's also undefeated, I think that he deserves to be there. So he also gets 56 out of 60 points. This is probably going to be the most controversial placing. But, once again, I explained my points. Fury, once again, has certain things that other fighters on the list do not have. And that is a definitive win over a top 5 pound for pound fighter in Vladimir Klitschko, and a definitive dominant win over a definitive top 20 pound for pound fighter at the very least in my personal view. So that's why Fury is this high. On top of that, at his best, he has shown me that he has the great all-around skill set against White, against Wilder, and against Klitschko. Yes, at times he has fought to the level and the caliber of his competition, but the reason why he doesn't get scored as harshly as someone like that of a Shakur Stevenson, or maybe someone else on the list like a Teofimo Lopez, is because, once again, I have seen what he can do against very dangerous fighters, or fighters that would be ranked as either top 5 pound for pound or top 20 pound for pound. So that's why Fury, once again, gets ranked a little bit less harshly in those categories, because, once again, resume is the most important category. And Fury does have a great resume, or at least a decent resume, for the heavyweight division. He at least has 2 wins against generational talents. So once again, that's the reason why Fury is so high in some of these categories, even when some of you might be a little bit puzzled. But anyways, when it comes down to it, that's the reason why I had that. Let's go on to number 4. So number 4, I have Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, and he also easily could have been higher on the list. Canelo is one of those fighters to where you could rank him anywhere from number 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and I don't think that he really drops anywhere below that of 5. But his resume, Canelo Alvarez's resume, speaks for itself. It has to be A+. It's a 12 out of 12. Recent success, it's an 11 once again, because the Dmitry Bivol loss, I do think, has to count against him just a little bit. But accomplishments has to be a 12 as well. The man has accomplished basically everything he's needed to in his career. Skill set, I also think, are a 12. Maybe you could debate an 11 because, his feet are a little bit clunky at times. But Canelo Alvarez, pretty much in everything else other than the feet, it's pretty much a 10 out of 10 in every single category. So that's why Canelo, he's pretty damn close to that of 12. And comparative to some of the other fighters on this list that even are ahead of him, you could even say that, they have the same amount of faults that Canelo has. Which is, maybe just one teeny tiny slight fault, which I don't think is enough to completely degrade that person of a 12 out of 12 skill set. And that's why I have Canelo at a 12. His feet at times are a bit clunky, but every other category I pretty much believe is a 10 out of 10. So that's why Canelo gets a 12 for me out of the skill set. Dominance I also have as an 11, because of course this year I believe he was able to beat John Ryder and that of Jamel Charlo. At least I believe he defeated both of those guys this year. And he was pretty dominant in both fights, but against John Ryder, he did look to struggle a little bit. He looked a little bit slower and a little bit lethargic. And of course, that loss against Dmitry Bivol, it does have to count against him a little bit. But Alvarez is someone that, of course, could easily be debated a little bit higher. I have him at number 4. But if he were to defeat David Benavidez this year, he also might have, once again, serious consideration as being the number 1 pound for pound fighter, just because Benavidez is now looked at as a decent threat, and he's looked at as an A-grade level fighter. And he's going to be bigger than Canelo and younger. So once again, it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. But Canelo is at number 4 on my pound for pound list. He has 58 points out of 60 total possible points. And I think all in all that, this is a very fair ranking. But anyways, let's go on to number 3. So number 3 on my list is Mr. Oleksandr Usyk. Of course, the Ukrainian. The resume, I ranked as that as an A. Now, you also could have ranked this as A+. He did defeat, in my view, a debatable top 10 pound for pound fighter a little bit ago in that of AJ Anthony Joshua. He actually was on my top 10 pound for pound list when Usyk ended up defeating him, because Joshua has such a good resume for that of the heavyweight division. And of course, Usyk was 20 pounds lesser than him. So the fact that Usyk was able to completely dominate him and embarrass him in 2 separate fights, I have to give him a great amount of credit. And on top of that, the cruiserweight division also, in my view, was not the worst when he ended up, defeating and unifying there. So his accomplishments also has to be an A+. It has to be a 12, because he's been undisputed in almost 2 separate weight classes. And one of them is really in a weight class where he probably never really should have been a champion there in the first place. But because of how skilled he is and because of how intelligent as a boxer is what he is, he pretty much gets there. Accomplishments is a 12, recent success is a 12, skill set is a 12, and dominance, of course, is a 12. So that means that they're all A+. Now, of course, there was a little bit of trouble against Daniel Dubois, especially with that of the alleged body shots, as many people would say. In my view, the shot was borderline low, so if you counted it as that, that's up to you. But pretty much every other moment of the fight, I thought that Usyk was dominating. He's still an undefeated fighter. He's one of the best fighters and the greatest fighters in the world. And that's why Usyk is at number 3. And he was actually my number 1 pound-for-pound fighter last year. So once again, it's really up to you. Once again, who you rank as your number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. It's up to you. It depends on what you like. But Usyk, at least at the current moment in time, is at the number 3 spot for me, getting 59 out of 60 total points, and I think that this is a fair ranking for him. But anyways, we'll see where he goes next, and of course, he also has great potential to become the undisputed number 1 pound-for-pound fighter this year if he's able to defeat that of Tyson Fury, someone that's going to be about 40 pounds bigger than him, if not even bigger, and clearly an A-plus level fighter when he's at his best. So Usyk could potentially also become the clear undisputed number 1 pound-for-pound fighter if he wins that fight, and also becomes undisputed in 2 separate weight classes, just like Crawford and just like that of Inoue. But anyways, that's it for that of Usyk. Let's go on to number 2. So at number 2 on my list, of course, we have the Japanese monster, or the monster, Naoya Inoue. Many people, once again, would debate him as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. As the resume, I have an 11. And the reason why I have an 11 is because I think that if we're going to compare resumes, I think that the only fighter that I would 100% say has a 12 out of 12 resume right now is probably that of Canelo. And the reason why I say that is because not only does he have a win over a former top 5 pound-for-pound fighter, but he has debatably a dozen A-grade level wins on his resume. Inoue, I think, only has 1 win over a former, top 20 to top 10 pound-for-pound fighter. And you could debate about how many A-grade fighters are really on there. I think that Emmanuel Rodriguez maybe debatably Nonito Donaire, and there might be one other that you could debate, but I don't think that there's much more after that. Every other category, of course, is a 12. In terms of recent success, the man has become undisputed in 2 separate weight classes within basically, a 12-month span, which of course is, within 1 year. That's an amazing accomplishment. Accomplishments, he's won the most amount of belts, I believe, and been undisputed in the most amount of divisions, at least, within that of the shortest amount of time. So once again, I have to give him a certain amount of credit for that. The skill set, at least as of yet, has proven to be 12 out of 12, and the dominance, of course, is 12 out of 12, and you could have even given him a little bit of a higher score. Inoue is debatably the most dominant fighter on the planet. He is debatably the most dominant fighter on the planet. So once again, I give him a lot of credit overall for that. I don't think that there's really much more else to say. You could have easily debated him as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. I wouldn't have minded it, but Inoue, in my view, the only thing that he's missing is a couple more or a few more A-grade wins. And if he were to become the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter, what he certainly could do is maybe become undisputed in the 3rd weight class, especially at the 126-pound weight division, because, those fighters are even going to be a little bit bigger than some of the fighters in what he's facing now. And there would be some interesting fights there, possibly against Ray Vargas, Brandon Figueroa, some of the guys there. So if Inoue can possibly do that, he very easily could maybe become the undisputed number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. But Inoue is right there, up there with anybody, Usyk, Canelo, some of the other guys out there. But as of right now, just because I think that he doesn't really have a definitive win over a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter, I have to put him at number 2. But, very easily could have been number 1, anywhere from 1 to 5. Inoue could have been anywhere from there. But anyways, now we get to the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter, at least in my view. So number 1, of course, has to be, at least at the current moment in time, Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. And the resume, I also have it an 11, and some people might say, what are you talking about? Why do you have his resume at a number 11? He just beat a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter, and he certainly did. But the reason why I only have his resume at a number 11 is because I don't think that it's quite there with Canelo Alvarez's or some other fighters that I've seen of the past, like that of a Pacquiao or a Floyd Mayweather Jr. I do think that there is that one A-plus fighter that he defeated, but I think that you also could debate that other than Spence and Sean Porter, that pretty much every other single win in his career is not an A-grade level win. And that's why Terence Bud Crawford, he only gets an 11 out of 12 for me, because I don't think that his resume is quite as expansive and quite as deep as that of a Canelo Alvarez's. But if you wanted to put it as a 12 out of 12, you very easily could. But every other category is also a 12 out of 12. The recent success, he has also debatably been up there with Inoue, Usyk, whoever else you want to put up there. Beterbiev as the most dominant fighter on the planet. Accomplishments, it has to be, also a 12. He's won a great amount of belts. He was the first man to become undisputed in 2 separate weight classes, so I got to give him a lot of props for that. Skill set appears to be a 12 out of 12. At times, depending on the caliber of his competition, he doesn't always seem as defensively sound as what he needs to be. He will at times get a little bit too hit, too much for his own good. But it appears that in that Errol Spence Jr. fight, that he really showed us what he truly could do. So that's why I put his skill set as a 12 out of 12, because when he needed to prove it, he showed that he had the all-around game. Just like Fury in his big fights, and just like some of the other guys on this list in their big fights as well. And dominance, of course, has to be a 12 out of 12, because he right there with Inoue, Usyk, and Beterbiev, they've all been debatably the most dominant fighter ever since they've pretty much gotten into the top 10 pound per pound, at least for me. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for my top 10 pound per pound list. So number 1 is Terence Crawford. Number 2 is Mr. Naoya Inoue. Number 3, Oleksandr Usyk. Number 4, Canelo Alvarez. Number 5, Tyson Fury. Number 6, Devin Haney. Number 7, Artur Beterbiev. Number 8, Dmitry Bivol. Number 9, Teofimo Lopez. And number 10, Shakur Stevenson. A lot of these guys could have really been interchanged. I would say that Shakur Stevenson and Teo, they're probably on somewhat of a similar level. I would say that, Artur Beterbiev, Dmitry Bivol, and Devin Haney, and even Tyson Fury, maybe you could debate somewhere around there, but I would say more Beterbiev and Bivol are kind of fighting for who's getting number 8 and who's getting number 7. And I think for number 6 and number 5, I think you're talking about Mr. Tyson Fury and also that of Devin Haney. I think you're talking about those 2 guys, and then you kind of have Canelo Alvarez at 4, and then debatable for the number 1 pound per pound fighter, you could debate Canelo, Usyk, Inoue, and Crawford. You really could debate any one of those fighters. And Canelo, of course, has the best resume on the planet right now. But I think overall that, the fact that he did lose to Bivol a little bit, and the fact that Usyk, Inoue, and Crawford have looked, as dominant as what they have been, sometimes even with the size differential, like Usyk against Anthony Joshua. I think that, of course, I do have to give him a little bit of props for that. But you could debate any one of those 4 fighters as the number 1 pound per pound, and I really wouldn't mind it. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching. Let me know what y'all think, and I'll talk to y'all later.